A man spends his career reading people, spotting inconsistencies, catching lies for a living. He is a lawyer, and he is about to tell you, in his own words, that none of that training saved him. Not from a con he never saw coming, from one he watched happen to himself in real time and still couldn't stop. Let's call him what he called himself, skeptical by profession. He assumed, like most people do, that being scammed was something that happened to other people. The unsuspecting, the naive, the people who don't already spend their careers picking apart arguments for a living. So when he opened a dating app and matched with a woman we'll call Tara, he wasn't worried. He was a lawyer. He'd have seen it coming. Within days, the two of them had built what felt like a real emotional connection. Fast, intense, the kind that usually takes months. He suggested meeting in person. Coffee? A drink? Nothing dramatic. Every time, something came up on her end. A cancellation? A reasonable sounding excuse? Then another. Instead of meeting, they moved to phone calls. And here's the part he later flagged as the turning point he didn't recognize at the time. Hearing her actual voice made the whole thing feel more real, not less. It gave him what he described as a false sense of reassurance. Here's the answer. And it's not about him being gullible. It's about a mechanism your brain runs on, without asking your permission. Psychologists call it intermittent reinforcement, the same principle that makes slot machines addictive. When a reward comes on a predictable schedule, your brain gets used to it and stops craving it as intensely. But when a reward is unpredictable, sometimes there, sometimes withheld, no way to know which, your brain fixates on it harder, not despite the inconsistency, because of it. He described this exact pattern in his own words. He'd pull back, telling himself he didn't need to talk to her constantly. And then he'd get a small scrap of attention, just enough to pull him right back in. That's not weak-willed. That's the same neurological loop that keeps people at a slot machine long after they meant to stop. This is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Scammers don't avoid smart targets. A psychology professor who studies scams has pointed out that con artists operate like amateur psychologists themselves. And one thing they understand is that intelligence protects you against bad logic. It does almost nothing against a slow emotional drip designed to bypass logic entirely. A trained lawyer can dismantle a bad argument in seconds. But intermittent reinforcement was never an argument. It was never something to analyze. Because by the time there was something to analyze, he was already emotionally invested. The trap wasn't sprung on his reasoning. It was sprung before reasoning ever got involved. At some point, he doesn't frame it as one dramatic instant, but as a slow accumulation of doubt. The pattern became impossible to keep explaining away. The excuses, the video calls that somehow never quite worked, the relationship that had all the intensity of something real, and none of the substance. He came to the conclusion most people in his position eventually reach. None of it had ever been real. Not Tara. Not the connection. It had been built, piece by piece, using a mechanism that has nothing to do with intelligence, and everything to do with how human attention works. He later said he sought help from a psychologist to process what had happened, not because he was foolish, but because being manipulated this precisely leaves a real mark. So, why didn't his intelligence protect him? Because intelligence is a defense against bad arguments. Manipulation like this was never an argument. It was a slow, engineered drip of unpredictable reward, aimed at a part of your brain that doesn't check credentials before it responds. This is why Just Be Smarter stories is useless advice against this specific tactic. The actual defense isn't intelligence. It's recognizing the pattern itself. If someone's presence in your life follows a rhythm of pulling away and pulling you back on a schedule you can't predict or control, that inconsistency is not an accident of circumstance. In manipulation, inconsistency is often the method, not the obstacle. The uncomfortable truth is this: manipulation doesn't usually target what you know. It targets how you feel. And feeling is something every single person has. Regardless of how many degrees are on their wall, the lawyer's mistake wasn't a lack of intelligence. It was assuming intelligence was the right kind of armor for this particular fight. And it raises an uncomfortable follow-up question, because the same trait that made him an easy target shows up in a completely different group of people for a completely different reason. People who aren't being manipulated by someone else at all. People who do it to themselves, quietly, every single day, just by being too nice to say no. That's next. If this changed the way you see the world, the next video on your screen will change the way you see yourself. Click it now. And if you're fascinated by the psychology behind everyday life, subscribe, because we're just getting started.